The rain had been falling for 3 days straight over the mountains of Quezon province when Staff Sergeant Dante Reyes first heard the word, aswang, whispered by a village elder who could barely stand from fear. Dante was a practical man. He had spent 11 years in the Philippine Army, had walked through flooded rice fields in Mindanao, had slept in jungle trenches with mosquitoes the size of coins, and had learned long ago that fear was a tool, not a weakness. He knew how to use it, and he knew how to fight through it. But when Barangay Masipag sent a desperate radio message to the nearest military outpost asking for help against something that had been taking people from their homes in the night, Dante did not hesitate. He gathered his 5-man team, loaded their gear into the old military truck, and drove up the winding mountain road as the rain came down like sheets of hammered iron. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. The village of Masipag sat at the edge of a thick forest that locals called Gubat and Gmga Lihim, which meant the Forest of Secrets. Nobody from outside the village used that name. Nobody from outside the village had reason to. The forest was old, impossibly old, and the trees inside it grew so close together that even at noon the light barely touched the ground. The village itself was small, maybe 40 families living in wooden houses built on bamboo stilts, connected to each other by narrow dirt paths that turned to mud in the rain. Dante's truck arrived at 7:15 p.m. on a Thursday evening. The headlights swept across the main path of the village, and what he saw made him sit up straight in his seat. Every door was shut. Every window was covered. Not a single child was playing outside, not a single adult was sitting on their porch. The village looked abandoned, except for the thin strips of yellow light leaking from the windows and the faint sound of prayers coming from inside the houses. "It looks like a ghost town," said Private First Class Rodel Buenaventura from the back seat. Rodel was 22 years old and had only been assigned to Dante's unit for 4 months. He was strong and eager, but he still had the habit of saying out loud the things that everyone else was already thinking. "It looks like a frightened town," Dante corrected him, stepping out of the truck into the rain. "There's a difference." The village captain, a heavy man named Capitan Ernesto Ligon, was waiting for them under the small roof of the community hall. He was wearing a raincoat, but it had not helped much. His shoes were soaked, his face was pale, and when he shook Dante's hand, his grip was unsteady. "Salamat sa pagdating ninyo," he said. "Thank you for coming. I was afraid you wouldn't." "We always come," Dante said simply. Capitan Ligon led them inside the community hall and locked the door behind them. The other members of Dante's team filed in one by one. There was Corporal Maximo Cassio, the team's medic, a quiet man with dark eyes and a habit of chewing on a small piece of wood when he was nervous. There was Private Ramon Tuazan, tall and thin with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. There was Private Second Class Lorna de la Cruz, the only woman on the team, who had transferred from a different battalion 6 months earlier and had already earned the complete trust of every man in the unit. And there was Corporal Bong Vergara, the oldest after Dante at 34, a man who had survived 2 ambushes and 3 floods and who laughed at almost everything except tonight. Tonight he was not laughing. Capitan Ligon sat down at the head of the long wooden table and folded his hands. He looked at each soldier one at a time before he spoke. "3 weeks ago our chickens started disappearing," he said. "We thought it was wild dogs or maybe a large snake. Then 2 weeks ago, Mang Crispin's goat was found dead near the edge of the forest. Not eaten, just dead with marks on its neck and its eyes completely white." He paused. "Then last week, Ailing Nina's son went missing. He was 8 years old. He went outside to use the toilet at 2:30 a.m. and never came back. We found his slippers at the edge of the forest, nothing else. The room was silent. Rain hammered the tin roof above them. And then 4 nights ago," Ligon continued, his voice dropping lower, "my own neighbor, Ben Aguilar, saw something at the edge of his property. He said it was shaped like a person but did not move like one. It moved too fast, too quiet, and when it saw him watching, it smiled at him. He said its mouth was too wide. Much too wide." The captain stopped. He pressed his hands flat on the table. "Ben is not a man who frightens easily. He fought in the mountains of Cordillera when he was young. But the next morning his hair had turned white, not gray, white." Dante listened to everything without interrupting. When Ligon was finished, Dante looked at his team. Rodel was gripping the strap of his backpack, Lorna was staring at the table with a careful, focused expression. Maximo had his piece of wood between his teeth. Ramon was quietly checking his notebook. Bong was looking at the ceiling. "Can we speak to Ben Aguilar?" Dante asked. Ligon shook his head slowly. "He hasn't spoken since that night. His wife says he just sits and stares at the wall." "What about the boy, ailing Nina's son, still missing?" Dante breathed slowly. "We need to walk the perimeter of the village tonight. All 6 of us. I want to see the forest edge, the paths, the area where the goat was found, and the spot where the boy's slippers were recovered." "Can you take us?" Ligon looked at him with something close to disbelief. "You want to go out tonight in the rain?" "The rain is actually helpful," Dante said. "It covers our sound. And whatever is out there, it is used to moving in this rain. That means we need to learn to move in it too." Capitan Ligon pulled on his raincoat and led them out into the dark. They moved in a quiet line, flashlights low, and pointed at the ground to avoid drawing attention. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, but the wind had picked up, and it moved through the trees at the edge of the village with a sound that was almost like breathing. Dante had heard wind in forests before. He had camped in enough jungles to know that nature made strange sounds, but this wind felt different somehow, as though it were searching for something. They reached the place where the goat had been found first. It was a small clearing just before the tree line, marked by a broken bamboo fence. Lorna crouched down and studied the ground with her flashlight. The soil was still dark and disturbed, even after 3 weeks. "No claw marks," she said quietly. "Whatever did this didn't drag it." "It was brought here and placed." "Placed," Rodel whispered. "The body was arranged," she said. "You can see from the soil patterns it wasn't dropped. It was set down carefully." Dante filed this information away without reacting. "Move on," he said softly. They walked another 100 meters along the forest edge until they reached the spot where the boy's slippers had been found. Maximo held his flashlight over the area while Dante studied it. A small wooden marker had been placed there by the family, a simple cross made of 2 sticks tied together with string. Someone had placed a small plastic toy beside it, a red car. Dante looked at it for a moment, then looked away. "The slippers were here," Ligon said, pointing, "side by side, neatly placed. Like he had taken them off himself, or like something took them off for him," Ramon said under his breath. They finished the perimeter walk and returned to the community hall at 10:45 p.m. Dante divided the night into watch shifts. He and Bong would take the first shift from 11 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. Lorna and Ramon would take the second from 1:30 a.m. to 4 a.m. Rodel and Maximo would cover the hours until dawn. No one was to go anywhere alone. That was the rule Dante stated only once clearly, and everyone understood. The first shift passed without incident. Dante and Bong sat at opposite ends of the community hall's small porch, listening to the rain thin out and the night deepen. At one point around 12:50 a.m., Dante heard something move in the tree line about 40 meters away. He signaled to Bong, who was already watching. They both held still. The movement stopped. The trees went quiet, nothing came out. "You heard that?" Bong asked softly when the silence had stretched long enough. "Yes, big, yes, fast, can't tell yet." They watched until 1:30 a.m. and then woke Lorna and Ramon. Dante briefed them in a few short sentences. "Movement in the tree line at 12:50 a.m., roughly nor-northeast. Whatever it was, it stopped when it realized we were watching. Stay alert." "Don't go in there." "Understood," Lorna said, already pulling on her vest. Dante lay down on one of the wooden benches inside the hall and closed his eyes, but he did not sleep. He could feel something at the edge of his awareness, like a sound just below hearing, like pressure changing before a storm. He lay still and breathed and let his mind go quiet, and in that quiet he heard it, not with his ears, with something older, a wrongness in the air. A feeling that something nearby was watching him through the walls. He sat up at 3:17 a.m. Lorna was already at the door when he got there. Her hand was on the frame and her face was tight. "Something's at the far end of the village," she said quietly. Ramon went to check. "He went alone," Dante said, and his voice was flat and cold. "He said he saw a light and she stopped. I told him to wait." Dante was already moving. He pushed out the door and walked fast along the main path, his flashlight off, relying on the pale gray light of the sky. The rain had stopped. The air smelled like wet earth and something else, something faintly sweet in a way that did not belong to any plant he knew. He found Ramon at the far end of the village, standing completely still in the middle of the path, staring at the tree line. "Tuazin," Dante said sharply. Ramon turned slowly. His expression was strange, not afraid exactly, but blank, like a man who had just seen something so outside his understanding that his mind had not yet decided what to feel about it. It was standing there, Ramon said, right at the edge, just watching me. What did it look like? Like a person. Ramon blinked, but the proportions were wrong, the arms were too long. The neck was too long, and it was crouching, even though it was tall enough to look over the top of that fence. He pointed to a fence that stood nearly 2 meters high. And when I came closer, it didn't run, it just leaned back into the shadows like it was being polite. Dante looked at the tree line. Nothing there now. Come back to the hall. Don't separate from the group again. I know, Ramon said quietly. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Learn. They returned to the hall. Dante sat everyone down at 4:10 a.m., even Rodel and Maximo, who were supposed to be resting, and he spoke calmly but directly. Whatever is out there is intelligent, he said. It watches from the tree line. It moved one of our men into a position where he was isolated and exposed. It knows what it's doing, which means we cannot respond with just weapons. We need to understand it first. You think talking to someone in the village will help? Lorna asked. I think there's an elder here who knows more than Capitan Ligon has told us. In most villages like this, there is someone who carries the old knowledge. We need to find that person before tonight. When morning came, gray and wet and smelling of pine and mud, Dante went door to door with Capitan Ligon asking questions. Most people answered in short sentences, avoiding eye contact. A few refused to open their doors at all. But at the seventh house, an old woman named Lola Caring let them in without hesitation, as though she had been expecting them. She was perhaps 80 years old, small and thin, with white hair braided over one shoulder and eyes that were still sharp and clear. She moved around her kitchen making coffee without speaking. And when she finally sat down across from Dante, she looked at him the way a teacher looks at a student who is promising but still has much to learn. You're not the first soldiers to come here, she said. I know, Dante said. But we want to help. Wanting to help and knowing how to help are different things. That's why I'm here talking to you, Lola. She looked at him for a long moment and then nodded slowly. What is out there, she said, is very old, older than this village, older than any of the stories we tell about it. We call it the Halama Ng Gubat, the beast of the forest. It has been here always. Usually it stays deep inside the trees and leaves us alone. We leave food at the edge of the forest twice a year, and it has always been enough. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. But 6 months ago, loggers from the city came and cut down trees on the far side of the mountain. The old trees, the deep ones, something disturbed what should not have been disturbed. And now it is hungry, and it is confused, and it is angry. What does it want? Dante asked. Lola Caring looked at him steadily. It wants what was taken from it, its home, its quiet. Its peace, she paused, but since it cannot have that back, it is taking other things instead. The boy, Dante said, is he still alive? The old woman was quiet for a long time. I believe so. The Halama does not destroy things when it takes them. It collects them, keeps them. Like a child who picks up smooth stones from a riverbed, she looked down. But the longer he stays, the less of himself he will be when he comes back. The forest changes what stays in it too long. Dante leaned forward. Is there a way to get him back without putting more people in danger? She nodded slowly. There is a way, but it is not a soldier's way. It requires patience and stillness and something offered freely. She met his eyes. Are you willing to do that? Tell me what you need. Lola Caring spent the next 2 hours explaining everything to Dante while his team waited outside. When he emerged, he called them together under the shade of a large mango tree and relayed the plan. It was not a plan any of them had been trained for. It was not in any manual. But as Dante laid it out piece by piece, he watched his team's faces shift from uncertainty to something quiet and steady. This was what soldiers did when the situation required it. They adapted. The plan required 3 things. First, a large offering of the village's best harvest food placed at the tree line before sunset. Second, complete silence from every person in the village after 9 p.m., no lights, no movement, no prayers spoken aloud. The Halama was sensitive to noise and aggression. Silence was the only thing that could slow it down. Third, one person needed to go to the edge of the forest at midnight and speak to it. Not demand, not threaten, speak. Lola Caring had said that the creature was not evil. It was wounded. Something wounded needed to be acknowledged before it could release what it was holding. Who goes to the forest edge at midnight? Rodel asked. Dante did not hesitate. I do. Sarge, it has to be one person. Lola Caring said a group will be seen as a threat. One person standing still in the open, hands visible, no weapon raised. Dante looked around the circle. I'll have my sidearm, but it stays holstered. This is not about firepower. This is about something else. Bong was quiet for a moment, then said, what if it doesn't work? Then we adapt again, Dante said. The day moved slowly. The soldiers helped the villagers prepare the offering, working alongside the women who gathered rice, sweet potato, fresh fruit, and flowers. There was something that felt right about doing this physical work together, the soldiers carrying baskets and the village children peeking at them through cracked doors. By late afternoon, a few of the children had gathered the courage to come out and watch. Rodel made a paper airplane out of a page from his notebook and sailed it to a little girl who caught it and ran back inside, and for just a moment the heaviness lifted a little. At 5:30 p.m., Maximo was sitting alone on the steps of the community hall when he heard crying from a nearby house. He stood up, hesitated, then knocked on the door. A woman answered. Her eyes were red and swollen. Behind her in the dim interior he could see a small shrine with a photograph and the red plastic toy car from the forest clearing. Ailing Nina? He asked gently. She nodded. Maximo was a medic. He knew how to treat wounds, how to close lacerations, how to stabilize a broken bone. He had never been trained for this kind of pain. But he sat down on her steps and he said, we are going to bring him home tonight, I believe that. He said it without knowing if it was true. But he said it the way people say things when they need them to be true badly enough, and she looked at him, and something in her shoulders dropped just slightly. His name is Kiko, she said. Tell me about Kiko, Maximo said. She talked for 20 minutes. About how Kiko loved red cars and mango juice and had just learned to whistle. About how he sang to himself when he was happy and went silent when he was scared. About how his laugh sounded like bells dropped on a tile floor. Maximo listened to every word. He did not offer false comfort. He just listened, and when she was done, he said, he sounds like someone worth going into the forest for. She nodded and pressed a hand over her mouth. Maximo returned to the group and said nothing about where he had been, but when Dante looked at him, he saw something in Maximo's jaw that had not been there before, a decision, a hardening. The kind that happens when a person stops thinking about danger in the abstract and starts thinking about what exactly they are fighting for. At 9 p.m. the village went dark and silent, exactly as planned. Every window was covered, every lamp extinguished. The soldiers spread out into positions around the village perimeter, not to engage, but to observe and to be present. They communicated only through small hand signals and brief clicks on their radios, 1 click for all clear, 2 clicks for movement detected. At 9:10, the radio clicked twice from Lorna's position on the eastern edge. Dante moved to her position. She pointed without speaking toward the tree line. In the dark, barely visible, something was crouching at the edge of the trees. It was tall even crouching, and the shape of it was wrong in the way that Ramon had described, too long in some places, too narrow in others. It was looking at the offering that had been laid out on a wooden platform 10 meters from the trees. It was perfectly still. Dante and Lorna watched it for 4 full minutes without moving. Then it reached out one long arm and touched the edge of the platform with what might have been a hand. It held the touch for a moment, then withdrew. Then it retreated back into the trees. Lorna exhaled very slowly. Dante noticed that she was gripping her rifle so tightly her knuckles were white. He reached over and very gently touched her forearm, not to calm her, but just to confirm that she was not alone. She loosened her grip slightly and nodded at him. The next 2 hours were the longest Dante could remember spending in the field, not because of explosions or gunfire, but because of the opposite. The silence was so deep and so total that every small sound stood out sharply: a frog calling from somewhere, water dripping from a leaf, the distant rumble of thunder moving away over the mountain. His team maintained their positions without complaint. He was proud of them for that. This kind of discipline, the discipline of stillness and patience, was harder than the discipline of action. At 11:58 p.m., Dante moved to the offering platform and stood in front of it, alone. He left his rifle with Bong and kept only his sidearm, holstered, as agreed. He stood with his hands open at his sides, facing the tree line. The night was cool and damp, and the forest in front of him was a wall of black broken only by the faint outlines of trees. He stood for 2 minutes without anything happening. Then at 12:02 a.m. something moved. It came out of the trees slowly, not all at once. First one arm appeared, resting against a trunk. Then the shape of a head tilted slightly, as though looking at him from an angle. Then the rest of it stepped forward, just barely into the open space between the trees and the platform. Dante had faced danger before. He had been in positions where his heart beat so loudly he could hear it, where his hands wanted to move to his weapon by instinct. He felt all of that now. He breathed through it. He breathed the way Lola Caring had told him to breathe, slow, from the stomach, like someone who is not afraid even when they are. The creature was enormous. Even at a distance, in the dark, he could tell it stood well over 2 meters tall and was built in a way that did not match anything in the natural world he knew. Its shape suggested a person, but only in the loosest way, the way a shadow on a wall suggests the object casting it without being exactly that object. It stood at the edge of the light and it watched him. Dante began to speak quietly, the way Lola Caring had coached him. He did not speak in Tagalog. He spoke in a language of tone and intention, because Lola Caring had told him the creature did not understand words as sounds but as feelings behind sounds. He spoke as one would speak to something ancient that had been hurt. He said that he understood something had been taken. He said that what the loggers had done was wrong and that the people of this village had not wanted it. He said that the boy Kiko was loved by his mother, who had a laugh like bells on tile, who sang to himself when happy, who had just learned to whistle. He said that the boy needed to come home. And he said that the village would continue to honor the forest, that they would advocate for the trees, that they would not forget what lived in the deep dark places of the mountain. He stood very still when he was done speaking. The creature did not move for a long time, then it turned and walked back into the trees. Dante stood and waited. His hands were shaking slightly. He pressed them flat against his thighs and waited. At 12:19 a.m., a sound came from inside the tree line. Soft, irregular, the sound of small feet on wet leaves. Then at the very edge of the forest, a small figure appeared. He was wearing a white shirt and dark shorts, and his feet were bare, and he was holding something in both hands, looking down at it as he walked. He walked out of the forest the way a child walks out of a dream, slowly, a little confused, not quite sure where he is. Dante took one careful step forward. "Kiko," he said softly. The boy stopped and looked up. His eyes were glassy and wide, but focused. "Ain't Nina," he said. He was looking for his mother. "She's close," Dante said. "Come here, son." The boy walked to him and Dante crouched down and looked at him carefully. No visible injuries, no marks. His eyes were clearing. In his hands he was holding a large smooth stone, gray-green, almost perfectly oval. He was holding it very carefully. "Where did you get that?" Dante asked. "The big thing gave it to me," Kiko said matter-of-factly, the way children describe extraordinary things. "It said to keep it. It said it would know I got home safe." Dante looked at the stone for a moment, then he looked at the boy's face. "Are you ready to go home?" Kiko nodded. Dante stood up and took the boy's hand and walked back along the path to the village. Behind him, on the forest edge, he did not hear or see anything. But he felt, in the way you feel someone watching you, that something very large and very old was standing at the tree line, watching them go. When they reached ailing Nina's house and Dante knocked on the door and it opened and the boy said "Nane," and the woman made a sound that was not exactly a scream and not exactly a cry but something between the two that contained about 11 years of love compressed into a single moment. Dante stepped back to give them room. He stood on the dark path and let himself breathe, just breathe. Maximo appeared beside him. He said nothing. He just stood there and breathed with him. After a moment, Bong appeared on the other side, then Lorna, then Ramon, then Rodel, who had been crying quietly and was trying to pretend he hadn't. "Good work," Dante said finally. "We didn't do much," Rodel said, wiping his face. "You stayed," Dante said. That was exactly the right thing to do. They spent the rest of the night and the early morning hours in the community hall. The village was still quiet, but the quality of the quiet had changed. It no longer felt held together by fear. It felt more like the quiet after rain, when everything is clean and the air tastes new. A few doors opened before sunrise. An old man came out onto his porch with a cup of coffee and just sat there, breathing the morning air, and it was one of the most ordinary and beautiful things Dante had ever seen. At 6:30 a.m., Lola Caring came to the community hall with a pot of rice and dried fish and banana blossoms cooked in coconut milk. She set it all out on the table without being asked and watched the soldiers eat with the satisfaction of someone who has seen a hard thing done correctly. You did well, she told Dante. You guided us, he said. I gave you words, you had the courage to use them. She sat down at the end of the table. Most people, when they encounter something they don't understand, they try to destroy it. That has never made things better, not in all the years I have been alive. What happens now? Dante asked. To the creature, will it settle back down? For a while, she said, as long as the forest is respected, as long as people remember to leave the offering. She looked at her hands. But the loggers will come back, they always do, and when they do, it will begin again. Dante was quiet. He looked at his team, at their tired faces and their half-finished plates of food. He thought about Kiko sleeping in his mother's arms right now with a smooth green stone beside him. He thought about Ben Aguilar with his white hair and his empty eyes. He thought about the shape at the edge of the forest, enormous and ancient and hurt. We'll file a report, he said finally, about the logging, the environmental damage. There are channels, Lola Caring raised an eyebrow. Do those channels work? Sometimes, Dante said, when the right people push them. He looked at her. Will you let me come back? To check on the village and to document what you know about the forest and what lives in it. She looked at him for a long time. You are not what I expected a soldier to be, she said. What did you expect? Someone who only knew how to fight. Fighting is the last resort, Dante said. Anyone can fight. The harder thing is knowing when not to. She smiled at him for the first time. It was a small smile, but it reached her eyes. Come back in 2 months, she said. Bring less gear next time. It makes you look threatening. Rodel laughed, and it was the first genuine laugh that had happened in that village in 3 weeks, and it moved through the room like a small warm wind. At 8:45 a.m. the soldiers packed their truck. The village had come alive by then, cautiously but truly. Children were out on the paths. A man was chopping wood. A woman was hanging wet laundry from a rope between 2 posts. Everything was slow and careful. The way movement is when people are still remembering how to be unafraid, but it was movement. It was life. Capitan Ligon shook each soldier's hand in turn. When he came to Dante, he held the handshake longer than the others and looked him directly in the eye. I have asked the army for help before, he said. They usually send people who treat us like a problem to be managed. You treated us like people. You are people, Dante said simply. As the truck pulled away down the mountain road, Rodel twisted around in his seat to watch the village disappear around the curve. Do you think it will ever stop? He asked. I mean the thing in the forest. Do you think it will leave them alone for good? I think it will leave them alone for as long as they remember to respect what they don't understand, Dante said. Same as with most things, the mountain road wound down through fog and pine trees. Below them somewhere the ordinary world was waking up, filling with traffic and noise and the kind of problems that had simple solutions. Up here the air still tasted like wet earth and something faintly sweet, and the trees pressed close on both sides of the road, dark and deep and impossibly old. Bong was watching the tree line as they drove, and after a while he said, very quietly, I saw something last night, when you were at the platform. I didn't want to report it because I didn't know what I was seeing. Everyone looked at him. When the creature stepped out of the trees, he said, there were others behind it, just shapes. Staying in the dark, maybe 5 or 6 of them, just watching. He paused. They didn't move, they just watched. And when you walked back with the boy, they all turned and went back into the forest together, like they were satisfied. The truck was quiet. Why didn't you tell me? Dante asked. Because there was nothing to do about it, Bong said, and I didn't want you to feel like you were being surrounded when you were trying to do something difficult. Dante considered this. That was good judgment, he said finally. I thought so too, Bong said. Then after a moment, I hope I never have to use that kind of judgment again in my life. Amen, said Ramon. Amen, said Lorna. Amen, said Rodel and Maximo together. Dante did not say amen. He looked out at the forest, at the deep green darkness between the trunks, at the places where light did not reach, and he felt that old familiar feeling again, the pressure behind the eyes. The awareness of something vast and watching. But this time it did not feel like a threat, it felt like acknowledgement. Like something ancient and enormous had looked at him and seen not an enemy, not a soldier, but simply a person who had tried to understand. He nodded once, very slightly, at the trees. The truck curved around the mountain and the forest fell away, and below them, far below, the wide flat lowlands spread out in the morning light. Ordinary and green and beautiful, and completely unaware of the things that lived in the mountains above them. Dante turned forward and did not look back. Some things did not need to be resolved to be finished. Some things just needed to be honored and let go and remembered. That was enough. That was, he thought, almost always enough. They reached the base at 11:20 a.m. and filed their report by noon. Dante included 3 pages about the environmental damage from the logging operation, with GPS coordinates and timestamps. He sent copies to the regional environmental office, to the DENR, and to a journalist he had met once at a conference in Manila who he thought might care about such things. He did not know if any of it would lead anywhere, but he had told Lola Caring he would try, and he was not the kind of man who made promises carelessly. Kiko, they learned 2 weeks later through Capitan Ligon, had recovered completely. He went back to school, he ate his meals, he laughed like bells on a tile floor. He kept the smooth green stone on the windowsill beside his bed, and every night before sleeping he pressed one hand against it, the way children press their hands against things that feel safe. And then he slept deeply and without dreams. The logging on the far side of the mountain was halted 3 months later, following an environmental review. Whether this was because of Dante's report or for some other bureaucratic reason, nobody in Barangay Masipag knew. But Lola Caring, when she heard the news, went to the edge of the forest alone at dusk and placed a small jar of honey and 3 perfect mangoes on the wooden platform, and stood for a moment with her head bowed, and then walked back to the village without looking behind her. The forest was quiet, the forest was old, and whatever lived in its deepest places settled back into the dark and the deep, and the village slept easily that night, and the night after, and the night after that, and for a very long time. Nothing came out of the trees.